The other thing that it's absolutely necessary for us to remember about all of this is that that's the way it is right now. We get confused because the Course will talk to us in terms of changing. And yet, there will be other places where the Course acknowledges that there is no possibility of change. So, while we accept responsibility, A, for our thoughts, B, we realize that those thoughts are now meaningless, C, our cog in this wheel is to recognize that we have never left that.
Right.
We have never changed it.
We've never changed.
That's the way it's always been.
I think it's important to me, when I listen to you, for instance, say that the one that's asking and the one that's answering are the same.
Yes.
That to receive that from the egoic point of view is meaningless. I mean, that's directed at the mind.
Yeah.
And the same thing's true in reading about the miracles. If we try to look at that from the point of view of, we have to elevate our level of consciousness a little bit to make sense out of this stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Roger. Jesus tells us, I'd like to have you perform miracles. I'd like to have you be a witness to the process of changing the consciousness. I'd like to have you perform miracles, but I'd like to have you ask me which miracles to perform. Well, we're lost. We're completely lost in that whole process if we don't believe that we can do a miracle. How could we ever believe that we can perform miracles as long as we deny the truth of what we are, which is being an idea in the mind of God, a thought in the mind of God?
So I'm wondering if, when I'm listening to you make that statement, and I'm saying, I need to receive that, from a higher level of consciousness, does this somehow have some relationship, you think, with the Holy Spirit?
Absolutely, totally, completely, absolutely interdependent. Because without that awareness, there is no way to get there. There is no way to find that place where you can perform a miracle. A miracle, let's look at it again. A miracle is literally moving yourself from the ego's perception to the awareness of God, to the God self, the Holy Spirit. So take away the Holy Spirit, and what have you got? You don't have the possibility of performing a miracle. You've got to be able to move, to get over that bridge into the God mind, to open yourself to the experience. Because it's that experience that we call a miracle.
So to pinpoint it more precisely, do you think that the communication with the Holy Spirit might occur at the moment that I decide to listen with a higher level of consciousness to what you're saying?
Yes. Yes. The irony, from the ego's perspective, Roger, the irony to that is that the moment the decision is made, it's done. None of the rest of it is relevant even. You remember the times we have talked about the story and who it was that was dreaming the story and who the character was that was in the story? And trying to distinguish between that, all of those, not to get yourself lost in the fact that you would believe that you are the character in the story. You're not. But that's why we seem to have this thing that we call a split mind. Because, as Tom said, there's that part of the dreamer who is the Son of God and retains all of the awareness of that God self. And yet we also seem to want to gravitate to this character we've made up in the story that doesn't have a clue. So We need the Holy Spirit. We need the God Self as the bridge to get from here to there, back to the one who knows. And it is the character in the story, and this is why we have so much difficulty. We identify with the character in the story, and yet it is the character in the story that in truth does not exist at all. And that's where we have the real ego problem. The ego does not exist in the mind of God, and therefore it does not exist at all. But you, that's the bad news. To the ego, that's the bad news. The good news, not to the ego, but the good news to you is that you are not that character in the story. There always seems to be such difficulty in awakening. We expect that the awakening is going to be of the character in the story. And that's not going to happen. The character in the story is simply going to disappear because the dreamer has awakened.
Why is it so hard to let go of it?
You can just answer that very quickly on why it's so hard. And you can answer it yourself. Tell me why you found it difficult this morning to wake up feeling as though you were the perfect love of God. Was that your first thought when you awakened?
No. And there's a piece of me that's afraid to let go because I feel like I won't exist.
That's the reason. You see, you've just answered the question. That's why it seems to be so difficult. You could say it another way. You could say it's because we haven't decided that we want it yet. Why don't we want it? Because, you see, there you go.
Afraid of not existing.
Yes.
And I know it says, we all exist and we're all an idea of God. But I feel like it means I won't exist.
Honey, that's why we've been trying to make a distinction between you as a dreamer and you as a character in the dream. As long as you identify yourself as the character in the dream, you're going to be afraid to step outside the parameters of the dream, because that's the only place you exist. How would you describe a miracle?
Well, could a miracle be, just how you perceive things? I mean, almost everything could be a miracle, couldn't it?
That's an interesting way to look at it.
You know, if you look on it as full of love, full of peace.
Depending on whether you saw it as a call for love.
Yeah.
Or an expression of love.
Or an expression, yeah.
Number 3 is miracles occur naturally as expressions of love. And the real miracle is the love that inspires them, not the effect. So a miracle is a cause, it almost seems like.
It can be either one. Again, depending on the meaning you give it, the purpose for it.
Seems like maybe according to the world's idea, a miracle would be something for which it seems to be no logical explanation.
That would be the world's explanation. It's true, Brian.
Seems like there'd be the components of asking and receiving the message and extending the message.
Yeah, that's true too. How would you tie a miracle into the experience of atonement? He tells us, how important atonement is. In fact, he says the essence of our awakening is simply your willingness to accept the atonement for yourself.
The atonement would be letting go of the illusion, and the miracle would be a method to do that.
It could be the experience of that. The atonement, more specifically, the atonement is connected with deciding upon the reality of something. And accepting the atonement for ourselves is all about not getting tied up with or caught in the experience of the world being real. The atonement is what sees, it's the vision that the Holy Spirit holds of the reality of who we are, which is nothing to do with how we see the world or how the world looks at itself. So how many of us, how many times have you sat back and asked yourself if you were willing to accept the atonement? This is kind of a issue that I've been going through, asking myself these last, probably 2 or 3 weeks now. How willing am I to accept the atonement for myself? And then I get caught up when I seem to deal with the world from the world's perspective. I say, wait a minute, maybe I'm not ready to accept the atonement for myself. Something else seems to be more important to me than this. And that, of course, is what brings into the picture our forgiveness. So let's try to tie all 3 of those together. The miracle being the experience, the atonement being the willingness to open ourselves to the experience. It's an interesting thing, and I'm going through this because of the painful situation I'm having with my shoulder. Watching yourself come to really very closely observing what your motives, what my motive is in choosing for the atonement. Am I trying to atone for something? Well, wait a minute. That's not what the atonement is about. The atonement is about understanding there is nothing to atone for. So I sit back and say, well, maybe that has something to do with the fact that the pain is still with me. Because what I'm trying to do is to find some kind of justification for being free of the pain. And you see how subtle that becomes? Yeah. Because that's not it. It's not, again, trying to accept the atonement for the effect of the atonement.
Say that again.
Yeah, that's how subtle it is. It is not trying, it is for us not to try to accept the atonement for the value that seems to be in the atonement. The value is in recognizing there was no need for atonement.
By trying to use the atonement to relieve yourself of pain,
Yes.
that's not the reason for the atonement.
That's when I discover that I am not willing to accept the atonement. I'm not. Otherwise, why would I still be wanting to use it to get rid of the pain?
So are you saying?
How subtle can that be?
Are you saying then that the atonement is the unity with the God mind and has nothing to do with the physical experience?
You could say that. You could say that. It's not about the physical experience, the effect of the physical experience being the motive for accepting the atonement. Because the physical experience itself is calls for a need to atone.
Wouldn't that kind of be like doing a prayer for something for yourself and then wondering why it didn't happen?
I think it would be a lot like that, Don. Yes,
It would be putting the cart before the horse.
it would exactly be that. So why would I want to accept the atonement for myself? It would become the proof that this story, every aspect of this story, has literally never existed. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. In our ability, our willingness to accept it or not accept it. Because now any attempt that we would make to try to atone becomes counterproductive to accepting the atonement. So I asked, what is the one thing that I can do then to convince myself that the atonement, that I really do want to accept the atonement for myself? And Brother says it's quite simple actually. You refuse to judge someone, anyone, for anything that has happened in the world that you see. You refuse to judge anyone for anything.
Because none of it ever happened.
Because there's nothing there to judge.
Yeah.
I felt such a sense of clarification when he said that, because suddenly all of this subtleness around the idea of, well, should I or shouldn't I, can I or can't I, just went away. Because now I can understand it very simply. When I judge, I am not willing to accept the atonement for myself, because I am stating that what happened, in other words, the reason that I'm judging, is real.
I think that's why I keep getting this message over and over, this isn't real. Because during this year of politics and everything else that's going on in the world, terror and school shootings and all this crap, you know, I read about it in the paper and it comes into my mind, this isn't real. You know, I just need to remember that.
That's beautiful, Brian. And that's the crux of exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm hoping it continues. Well, it has for a couple of years now, so.
Yeah.
Even sometimes when something good is happening, it still comes and says this isn't right.
Equally important.
Yeah.
Do you want it to be real? The answer is yes, we do. Because if we didn't, we wouldn't be struggling with it. We do want it to be real, and why? Because we think that it is our creation. This character that you hear Tom and I talk about all the time, this character sitting at the table, is who I think I am. And without this character, there doesn't seem to be anything for me to relate to. And that is what brings us, again, to the crux of everything you're going to read in this book, which is this Holy Spirit, this God's self, is who you are. It is not the character that sits at the table, but it is the God self, the God created self. That is who we learn to turn to, because that is who we are. Isn't it interesting? Here we're sitting saying that the script that we've written, the script that is running the world, is going to continue, and it's probably going to do the same thing over and over and over again. Why can't we finally come to the conclusion that there must be another way? And the ego is going to say, well, but that's easy for you to say. How are you going to get along in the world if you don't conform to the world's program? And what's the answer to that? There ain't no program out there. The only program that's running is the one in my mind. So, as we go through the miracle principles, try to see them from this new perspective. Try to see them from the standpoint that the only reason that these principles, that we may need these principles of miracles, is to prove to us that the world has never happened. And that, incidentally, my friends, is why a miracle is possible. Because it says to us that for a moment, we have allowed time to be suspended. We have allowed the principles of the world to be suspended. And we see the reality behind. And so everything seems to change. Everything then conforms to timelessness. Everything conforms to loving. Everything conforms to the laws of God and not the laws of the ego. And we didn't do a thing. It's just that we did not call upon the world to solve the problem. We called upon the God Self to bring the awareness of God into the world. Not into the world, but into our mind, into our perception. And everything changed. Everything. See a miracle for serving that purpose. And let's ask ourselves, when we ask for a miracle, is it really a miracle we want? Is it really to atone or accept the atonement? Or do we want some outside force to just make our story better? Give us the story we want instead of the one we think we resist. Mm-hmm. I think this really began to fester in my mind when I heard, we watched the news the evening of the shooting in the school in Oregon. And I heard our president stand there and become totally discouraged and saying, here we go again. And we were all feeling that. Here we go again. And I started to ask myself, but wait a minute. Why? Why? Because immediately what we were focused on doing was finding the perpetrator and punishing him. Discovering all of the circumstances that could have been behind it, and then invoking the world's law. In other words, doing everything that we have always done before. Isn't that why these things continue to occur as they did before? We're not doing anything differently.
In fact, what we do strengthens the illusion.
Exactly so.
Maybe that's why they keep happening, to keep getting the reaction.
Yes. So how many times do we have to continue with that before we, us, right here, decide there is a better way? I wonder what would have happened if our president could have sat down with Vladimir Putin, and the first thing out of his mouth would have been, we do recognize that you folks are having some difficulties. What can we do to help? Or we're looking at the tracking and hunting down and killing all of the people in ISIS. What would happen if we made it known, we put it out, word out into those communities? What could we do to get together about this? It's an attitude, my friend. When our attitude is attack and defense, then that's the only thing we're bringing to the table. And so what else can we expect?
Why would our ego choose that?
Sorry.
Why would our ego choose that, the attack and defense?
Because that is what substantiates the ego's belief that there's something wrong, that sin is real, and that we need to be punished for it.
The world's not real, and yet we created something that's insane.
Totally true, honey.
Our brain has trouble wrapping around it.
We don't do that consciously. What you just described is still theoretical with us. It's what we're learning. It is not what has become our truth. The other thing that's probably worth reminding ourselves of at this point is that this thing we keep referring to and calling an ego, what is that? What is the ego except our indecision about whether or not we accept the truth or continue with the illusions of attack and defense? The ego is not a being. It is not an independent thought system. It is the reflection of our confusion in accepting the truth, our indecision in reflecting the truth. If we could sit here and be absolutely certain that love was the only thing we wanted, there would be nothing, no ego to oppose it. But in our indecision that, I'm not quite sure this is all I want, there is another voice that is born. And that's the voice we call an ego.
Is it that part of the mind that's reinforced by our belief in the illusion?
Yes, yes.
So we've created the ego by our belief.
Yes. What does he mean when he said miracles are habits and should be involuntary? What again are we talking about a miracle being? A miracle is accepting the atonement for ourselves. And everything else is about the world. So a miracle would be making choices from the perspective of God's truth. And if we made the choices from that perspective, would we be consciously choosing miracles? No, we wouldn't. And so we only choose the ones that seem to satisfy our current need.
So the impetus to initiate a miracle is the asking. Is that a conscious effort?
Yes.
That's the only conscious effort.
That's the only conscious effort we need to employ.
Yeah.
If we have trust. If you don't have trust, then there are several other things that seem necessary to happen. What is purification? It's the distinction between what is real and what is not real. Choosing from the place of what is real and not choosing the laws of the world.
Would that not be the function of the Holy Spirit?
It would be the function of the Holy Spirit to do that. It is our function to accept it,
But not to try to do it.
but not to try to do it, because we don't have any clue. Well, we may have clues.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
So if we're choosing from what is real, only love is real.
Yes. So every miracle, and that's probably in here somewhere, every miracle is an expression of love.
Then that would be what's natural.
And
Going back to
good,
Greek.
Sam. Good.
Yeah.
Tie that together. Yes.
Mhm.
That is the only thing that's natural. Yeah. Only love is natural. And yet he's telling us that miracles are healing because they supply a lack. How do you explain that?
Supply healing to a perceived lack is how I read it.
That's what he means by those who temporarily have more. In other words, when you see yourself being in that place of expressing love, you temporarily have more than the one who is coming from the place of fear. There are many things that we confuse with miracles. We call them miracles because they've gone out of our timeline. They've taken us out of our belief pattern for a while. But when you are clear, very clear about what you would like to have experience in this world that we all seem to share, and you expect that that's what's going to happen, it will. Brian, you may say that you didn't expect that to happen, but I would suggest that you probably did have a very high degree of expectation that this was what was needed. You needed something like this in order to heal your financial woes for the moment. And so, it will. It will, because we are the same mind. We do share the same thinking. And that may not seem to be a miracle, and probably doesn't qualify under the definitions that he's giving us here. But it does allow you to experience within the world. It's what we call manifesting. And that's all it is. It's just being very, very clear about what it is that you want to happen and expecting that it will. So we're reminded that the benefit that we're really talking about here is not the benefit of what the thing is that we receive from the miracle, but the love which we are the true beneficiaries of.
So that makes sense now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That takes it out of the realm of fixing what's out there.
Yes.
It's accepting,
Yeah.
recognizing and accepting the love that goes with it.
Yes. Good.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a part of us that recognizes this, what Jesus tells us in the Course constantly. You're the presence of love. You're the expression of the love of God. My goodness. Is that, how does that make you feel? Just to pause for a moment and say, I am the expression of the love of God. What could be more incredibly beautiful than that? You see, once we, even from a, logical, and I use that in quotes, perspective, if we understand that we are the ones, we being the collective consciousness, we are the ones who are making this world. We are the ones who are creating all of the experiences that happen in the world. And the outcome for each of us is always entirely and totally 100% determined by what our outcome for it was going in. In other words, when when you really want to know how something is going to turn out, just be very clear on how you want it to turn out. And that's the only way it can happen. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just, that's the way the world works. But what we try to do is get in the middle of it and insert our fear about, oh my God, what if this happened? Or, oh wow, I hadn't thought of that. Or, gee, many Christmas, what about, well, guess what? That fear then becomes the determiner of what the outcome is. So, each time we step back and say to the God self, take over. You do this. Show me what would be the best outcome for me to hold clearly that would benefit everyone concerned. I think I've mentioned this in the group before, but it is true that in our moments of loving, of being defenseless, particularly of being defenseless, we are taking away many of the unnatural blocks in our mind between ourselves and our thoughts and other thoughts that are flowing through the consciousness. And sometimes those are kind of fearful thoughts. In fact, a lot of the time, you'll find extremely extraordinary, and you're sitting back and saying to yourself, my goodness, where did that come from? That's not mine. And yet, we have a tendency to want to claim it simply because it happened to come through one of the filters. Well, you don't need to. You can recognize it for exactly what it is. This is a thought in our consciousness. And for me, I like to, when I am able, I like to look at it and think, this is an opportunity. This thought came to me as a call for love. And so it's an opportunity for me now to offer love to whatever purpose that thought might have been trying to accomplish. And instead, kind of turn it around and let it go in a very loving way. Ask, honey. Sometimes the best thing for a child, for anybody, is to pick up something that they're going to be exposed to. We don't know why or how, but ask. Because your guide is specifically aware of everything that will benefit your child. So you just ask.
As for my guidance, is what you're saying?
For your guidance
not
of what to do for them. Should I allow them to watch this political thing? Should I allow them to watch this newscast? So if you have trouble, for instance, hearing because your mother instinct seems to be overriding your ability to hear, then ask the Holy Spirit. This is always fun for me. Because what I do is I say, well, tell Linda. I'm saying, I'm kind of cloudy about this thing, so tell her. Let her get it in some way, and she can tell me. So, say to the Holy Spirit, tell Dennis. Or whatever. But the point is, you can ask for help and get help. Sometimes you have to be a little creative, but you can still do it. You will always, 100% of the time, discover that when you are clear about your intention in a relationship, that will be the intention of the one you are in relationship with. It will be compatible. It can't be any other way when you realize what it is that's happening. Mind is just trying to express itself. But when you allow your ego to be in conflict with another ego, just the opposite will happen. Because that's the intention. The conflict becomes the intention. But when you are in a loving mood, when you are extending a loving feeling, that's the only thing that you will ever discover coming back to you. This business about love coming back when your integrity is extending love. I had we had an experience 25 years ago when we used to be traveling around the country, and we were in New York. Every year we would go to New York twice to do these gatherings.
With John Mundy.
With John Mundy, yeah. He was our sponsor. And at the first meeting that we were there was a lady, she never even spoke up at the time, but when we came back 6 months later, and I was talking about pretty much the same thing, she said, I have an experience to share with you. She said, I worked the night shift as a nurse at the local hospital. And every night I am just petrified when I leave work. I take the subway. There's rarely any other people around. And she said, I'm always afraid I'm going to be assaulted. So I'm very cautious. And she went through to explaining how tense and everything she always was. Anyway, she said the other night she was on the train just about ready to get to her stop, and she noticed another man came in, walked into the car and sat down opposite her on the other side and just kind of stared at her. And she said, oh my God, I know, this is it. This is all of my fears are going to come to pass tonight. And she said, I was just absolutely terrified. And they came to my stop, and I got off the train, and something went boom, and it hit me of what we talked about at this gathering 6 months ago. That a loving intention is always returned. And she said, I took a couple of breaths and I asked the Holy Spirit to really come with me in this feeling of wanting to give out love. And I turned to this man and I said, I'm really sorry to ask you this, but I'm terribly afraid to be alone at night. Can you walk me to my door? And she said, I don't even know where those words came from. But he did, and we had a nice conversation. And I got up the steps to my door, and I got the key, and I got the door open, and then I felt guilty. So I turned around, and he was standing at the bottom of the stairs, and I said to him, I have to confess, I thought you were going to attack me. And he looked at her with a wistful look and said, I was. And walked away. I think most young people have a far greater connection to their loving instincts than you all being younger than I would have more than I. But I think that's part of the evolution of our consciousness. That love becomes more instinctive now, and particularly with the younger children who are coming in. And I think you can trust that. But I think we have to help them in their process of learning to trust it, as opposed to what they see and feel they have to trust in the world. We have to give them a little encouragement to do what we're trying to do. And the way that I've found that is most helpful is to ask them, rather than preach to them, ask them. In fact, it's also very helpful with our children sometimes when we have an issue to sit down with them and say, can you help me? That really opens a child to a sense of worth, that you would come to them and ask. What if there was no fear? In other words, does memory serve any purpose for love? If love is all there is, what do we need to remember? We're just loving. And one act of love is simply, forgive me, but it's much like another act of love. And so we don't need memory. It's only fear that requires us to remember. And so, let's give up the fear. Can we do that? In effect, all thoughts appear with their opposite attached. So we're always looking at both sides, so-called, of an issue.
No.
And that's always then lacking in conviction. So you would have to ask the God Self for his conviction. What do I really want from this? What should I really expect from this? That would bring the conviction for you, because your own mind is going to be split on the subject.
So what does conviction mean, really? I mean,
It means
you're saying
assurity, assurance, you being absolutely sure that this is what you want.
So I'm absolutely sure this is what I want, is to bring like the Spirit, Holy Spirit's presence, or God's self-presence, or to see love, or see the truth.
So most of the time you would say that, we would say that, what I want most is to feel the love of God. And if we went to the God Self and said, what do I really want? The God Self might say something to us like, if you did let go of this particular issue, you would always feel the love of God. So just asking for us to ask to feel the love of God doesn't get the job done. Brother always used to say to people, the first thing to ask your guidance should always be, what is my question?
To me, conviction, as it's stated here, is a belief that when we request a miracle, it will happen. It doesn't mean that I have the right to state how or what miracle should happen. It just means that I have the belief, since I've turned it over to the Holy Spirit, that the situation will be resolved to the benefit of everyone, and I have the conviction that it will be so. And I may not know how that worked out right now or tomorrow, but probably someday I will. It's just saying, to me it's just saying, okay, I've turned this over, it's yours, I know you're going to handle it and there will be a miracle. Now, I may or may not see some direct result from that, but it's done. It's done. That's it.
Is it like intention?
Well,
What's the difference between
an
conviction?
intention is a kind of a hope to me. A conviction is, I'm certain this is done because I've turned it over to the only thing that can do it.
It has the quality of the certainty.
Yes.
The thing that's always been most helpful for me in regard to letting the body go, is when I've heard over and over and over again, brother, tell other people, letting go of the body is not your real concern. Your real concern is letting go of the device you have created to remain separate. So let go of your need to be separate. That's the issue you should be focused on. The body is just a means to an end. The thing that's always been most helpful for me in regard to letting the body go, is when I've heard over and over and over again, brother, tell other people, letting go of the body is not your real concern. Your real concern is letting go of the device you have created to remain separate. So let go of your need to be separate. That's the issue you should be focused on. The body is just a means to an end. Okay? Something just occurred to me as we were coming in the front door there, and I wanted to bring it up and talk about it before we really get started today. Because I'm sure you all have things like that seem to happen. You'll be strolling down the street and suddenly a thought will come into your mind. And you say, oh, gee, well, and you just kind of go on with it. Well, we have talked other times about how you don't need to claim every thought that comes through your mind, because many times, we're always connected to the mass consciousness anyway, because there's only one mind for us to use. But there's another aspect to that I wanted to bring up, and that is our guidance. Once you have signed up, so to speak, to move into a mindset that would accept the truth of who you are, you open up a whole Pandora's box of what is available to you and actually what yourself comes to expect of you. And what that means, very simply, is that your guidance, you've asked for guidance to help you get to this place we call truth. And so this God self, this part of you that's real, is going to fulfill its function and continue to come to you and remind you of things to do that are helpful for you to accomplish what you want. And many times I've found for myself that these thoughts will come into my mind and I'll just kind of pass them off or do a little something or think about them for a minute, but I don't really register the significance that they truly have. And that is, how much more attention would I pay if I realized that those thoughts were coming from my God self as kind of a tap on the shoulder, a reminder of something that was there for me to connect to understand, whatever, that would be helpful for me. And so I shouldn't be just taking it in stride. I should pay attention to it. Once I had started to discover that, I was amazed at how many times it happens that before I had never even registered it at all. And so it's very helpful, very significant for us to learn that what we have asked for, we are going to get. The problem is we don't realize we're getting it. So pay attention.
Sending back his cell phone, but I have to send it in a box that it came in. And I'm thinking, I don't know where that box is. I'm standing at the computer, and I look up and I see this box, and I said, oh, maybe that'll fit in there. I pull it out. It's the box that it came in. This has been happening lots.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. It's that kind of thing that you can become more open to and recognize what it is. And that's helpful for a lot of reasons. But, how many times have you ever wondered whether or not when you went into your meditation and you called in the God self, if that really happened? Or maybe this was all you just kind of making it up. Well, when you start getting feedback like we're talking about, it becomes pretty apparent. This is not something that's happening by accident. This is a plan. And that's helpful to know that, to be able to trust it and lean into it. And I have one other subject that I wanted to bring up before we get into the principles. Have you ever had the feeling that maybe particularly when you look at perhaps the evening news and you see all of the conflict, the hatreds and the stuff going on in the world, that it's going to be a long, long time before our awakening ever happens? Because there's a lot of people out there that are just still pretty primitive. Have you ever had that feeling? I had it again this morning. Linda has been having some difficulty with, we don't even know what company or who it is, but somebody trying to hack into her bank accounts and stuff. And I'm thinking, it's just kind of disappointing that there's still so much of that goes on out there. And psychologically or subconsciously, I'm thinking, I'm glad I don't have to wait for them to awaken and so on. And then I find myself thinking, wait a minute, whoa, where are you going with this? What does this mean? So I asked myself, what would it really be like? What would it prove to me if I could awaken at some other time, maybe sometime behind when Jesus awakened, or sometime ahead of when this hacker would awaken, or whatever? What would that prove to me? Wouldn't it absolutely prove to me that separation was real? That dreams are real? So I start thinking, doesn't that imply that there will come a moment when every mind, everywhere, shares the same thought, and the awakening will occur? What we call awakening, but the dream will end. Isn't that what it's really telling us? The more I think about that, the more then I start to wonder, well then what's my part in making that happen? Where do I need to be? And the answer then becomes really relatively simple. Where I need to be is seeing that that's true. In other words, relieving my mind of the need to be closed against or harboring a thought that isn't true, but just to open up. When it comes, recognize it's coming. And then coincidence upon coincidence. I sit down to do my morning study and meditation. And today's lesson is only an instant does this world endure. Are you folks doing the lessons sequentially? If you are, that's the lesson for today, which is along the same lines that we're speaking of. And then on the page just opposite that, only an instant does this world endure. But it's essentially saying that when we're ready, it's going to be finished. And then I go and read the next page. What is the second coming? And I'd like to, if you're all willing to do that, I'd like to read that before we start the rest of our talking this afternoon. We, first and foremost, in studying the Course, learn that the world is unfolding in our mind. We are not creatures experiencing a worldly experience, but we are creatures who are creating an experience of separation that we call a world, and projecting it outside of our mind so it looks like all of us sitting here in this place at this table doing something. Will we allow that to happen? If it has happened, which is the other thing the Course tells us, of course, that it's already done. If it has happened, and we're still sitting here trying to make it happen, what does that say about what we're doing?
Kind of insane.
Wouldn't it also occur to us as a possibility that if it had already happened, I'm just sitting here waiting to acknowledge that it's happened? There isn't anything more to do. Is that a possibility? What am I missing? What am I missing, and why and how? I mean, is my mind so closed down that I don't really see what's happening around me? The answer to that, my friends, is yes. Just that, yes. That's exactly what it means. Just as it's impossible for love, true love, to be present in the separateness. One precludes the other. Because the oneness is the experience. As Patty was saying that we experience. That is the experience of loving.
But then if you bring it down to this world, it separates again.
Doesn't have to, honey. That's the purpose of forgiveness. The only reason it separates when you bring it down back into the world is because you are allowing the world to dictate that something is wrong. The differences are real.
Yeah.
But if you brought it back recognizing, let's say that we each made a pact to give the world the purpose of illustrating our union instead of our separateness. So that we could look on everybody that we ever saw and just have an inward feeling of wanting to see the love within them. Would we see it or not? That was the idea I had in mind the other day when I said spend a minute, invest a minute in loving. Any comments?
Well, for this next to last sentence to be true, the second coming is the time in which all minds are given to the hands of Christ. Would that mean the second coming for whoever could view that or perceive that would be the second coming for them? It doesn't necessarily mean that all minds will share this view at the same time?
Yes, it does mean that. It does
mean that there is a...
It does mean that there will be one moment when all minds become joined. The second coming is as he says in the first paragraph, merely a correction of the mistake and a return of sanity. When are we going to be sane? When we no longer believe in our separateness. When our oneness becomes our reality. And so the second coming is that moment when we will all look around and say, you're not really a terrorist. You're not really a saint. And I'm not a sinner, and I'm not a... What we are is united as the holy child of God. And everything else is irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. Now, you see, even when we just said that, everything else is irrelevant. What else could there be in the world of experience that would have any impact on whether or not I loved you? Anything? No. That's the second coming. That's saying it'll all happen at once. There will be one moment when the awareness of truth is accepted by the one child of God.
But is this saying that if one person has that awareness, in a sense, doesn't that cover everyone?
It does and it doesn't, Dennis. It does if you're taking the Holy Spirit's view of it, but it doesn't in the ego's view. If there is one, when you were describing it as one person accepting something, you're lost.
Yeah.
You're lost, you see, because it's immediately you're seeing it in the context of you and me.
So in other words, it just takes, what we're calling one person, but actually is the one mind.
The Holy Spirit would look at you getting it, as being everyone, because the Holy Spirit sees that you are everyone. There is not that separate meaning given to you or to me or to Jesus or Buddha or whatever. But the ego, you see, in trying to analyze it, would be approaching that from the standpoint of separate minds being real. When I could finally accept what this paragraph that you're reading right now says, then I know what Brother means when he says it's done, it's over now.
You gotta shut off the projector and walk out of the theater.
If we knew, if we could just accept what's outside the theater, we'd all be trampling all over each other to get out there. In this equality is Christ restored as one identity. Within the context of the ego's language, that can mean there would be 10 billion individuals, all of whom were united within the same context of being loved and loving. And to me, that is the secret, so-called, of knowing what the second coming means. It's when I can look at God's love and recognize that it is my love. So it would be yours and belong to everybody. But within that context of loving, there was no longer any purpose in trying to identify separately. Remember, the only reason that separation still serves a purpose for us is to have somebody upon whom we can project our imagined sin. And if we wipe out that idea that sin exists, where is the usefulness in being separate? We won't want to be separate. We all want to be the same. When we look at a brother and see this beautiful beaming light in them, why wouldn't we want to be the same? This person that I now condemn and wonder how he could be so selfish as to want to get into our bank account. That's my salvation. That's my way to God. Can you feel that?
I think that's what it's talking about in the Course when it says, take my brother by the hand and let him lead me out here.
If we could only get that, Brian.
Because you'd think it should say, take your brother by your hand and lead him out of here. But that's not what it says.
No. I will never see you any differently than when I see myself. It's the same. And we're going to be stuck with that from now on.
Well, what about the other person?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I'm projecting whatever my problem is or issues are onto this person, is that person there? Or have I just created an image that I'm throwing all this stuff at?
Or there's another possibility.
Pardon?
There's another possibility.
Well, what is it?
You and this other person are actually working in cahoots. Because you are, beyond the identity that you're giving it, you are actually, behind the scenes, the same person. So you see how each one would have to satisfy the purpose of what seemed to be the other one? Oh, that's a stretch.
So I have a question. So another person is projecting on to you that you've done something or you're this horrible person or whatever, and you don't accept that because you know that's not true. And then this other person gets very, very angry because you're not playing their game. So explain that to me.
How do you feel about this other person?
Good question. I'll
The
think about
answer,
that.
the answer to that is simply, if you love them, if how they felt toward you was totally irrelevant in your perception, if you loved them, you would see that they are a part of you, and there wouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
If it affects you and somehow it's still eating away at you, then you believe that what they're saying is true.
Okay.
I don't get caught up. I don't get caught up in reacting to anything that I don't believe is true.
That's a good statement.
But I get caught up in everything and reacting to everything that I do think is true.
I like that.
Somehow we have to fully accept that we're loved before we can even go there.
I mean, it's always the bottom line. Yes. Always. That's why we say, before anything else occurs, when the first moment of uncertainty arises in your mind, you make it a habit to invite in the God self. Say, well, wait a minute. Everywhere else I'm in fear. Only here can I be coming from a place of loving. And even when I don't think I'm here and I'm coming from the place of loving, I know I can rely on you to tell me. So tell me what I should be seeing. Tell me how I should feel about this. That's taking advantage of the real purpose that God gave us the Holy Spirit for. There are moments, more moments, that we get lost in our perception than moments that we are clear. Let's face it, that's the nature of our perception now. And so rather than just abandon us, so to speak, to the wiles of our ego, we've got another option. But you've got to cultivate that option. That's what we were talking about when we began the meeting today. You start becoming aware of the plan, of the help that's always there, that's always being given us. And you watch how it's guiding you, and pretty soon you begin to say, oh, well, then maybe I should take advantage of this more. What is it that determines how we feel? It's our state of mind. And what can correct our state of mind more than going to that place where the first thing that comes to you when you're sane, the first thing that comes to you is that you're perfectly loved. And then you begin to take that for granted. I am perfectly loved. And now if somebody seems to attack you, it won't affect you.
And should we also think that we're perfectly loving?
It's the same, Sam.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same. You can't feel one without the other.
Yeah. You know what? It's kind of interesting. Is I don't know if it's helpful. It seems to be helpful to me. I think that, in a sense, we're all having a conversation with ourselves. So,
Nice, huh?
we're all one, really. So.
Well, that was Donald's selection. Why he selected the copy of Conversations with God. Who are you having a conversation with when you think you're having a conversation with God? You're having a conversation with yourself. Not the self that we're talking about here, but with the self, the real you.
Is that the way you feel about guidance from Brother then?
Absolutely.
Or any of us can feel about any guidance that we get that seems to be loving is part of ourself that we have denied?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Christ is within, Holy Spirit is within.
Yeah.
It's all within.
Yeah.
You see, we're being accommodated. The Course does this so beautifully. But we're being accommodated with the language that it's using. But at the same time, sometimes it can be confusing. Because it does speak to us on different levels. So, it's up to us to remember that we can always have those levels straightened out for us by simply going to the God Self and saying, I don't understand this. Show me what it's really meaning for me.